Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. Good morning from Wyoming once again, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we are rapidly approaching one of my favorite holidays of the year. Yep, the 4th of July, or more appropriately, Independence Day. 249 years, ladies and gentlemen, since the kickoff of the greatest experiment in self-governance in human history. And we are a hair's breadth away from losing it. And since I will still be out here working, I'm going to do a bit of celebrating in this episode by sharing with the audience the words from the best breakup letter ever written. Then I'm going to talk about how that same government that was created following our republic's breakup with the world's most powerful nation, how that government is behaving in a manner now that is quite like the charges laid out in that letter. I'm going to focus in on a bit of a different angle that I really haven't heard discussed that much, but really plays into this week's discussion. Thank you to the audience members that provided me with some feedback on last week's episode. It's always appreciated. One listener reminded me that I forgot to mention the Tennessee Constitutional Grassroots Coalition Freedom Festival in last week's episode. So thank you, and here is the information once again. The annual Freedom Festival is scheduled for October 4th in Loudon, Tennessee. There are a bunch of great speakers and entertainers lined up already. For more information, visit the website. It is tcgc1776.org. Again, that is tcgc1776.org. I have a couple of quick programming notes for the audience as well. In a couple of months, August specifically, there will be a time where I do not release an episode, maybe 3 or 4 weeks worth. There's nothing wrong, but I'm going to take a break away from the show and my consulting business to spend some quality time with my bride. It just dawned on me this week that it was 8 years ago last week that I was piped ashore for the final time in uniform, and it has been quite hectic since then with only a couple of short little vacations, mostly excursions with my church. Well, except for that brief 8 months I experimented with being fully retired back in 2017 to early 2018. Let me tell you, both Denise and I were not ready for me to be underfoot around the house full time back then, hence the startup of my consulting and shortly followed by this podcast. As we get closer to the date of the hiatus I'm going to take, I will let you all know. I've also arranged for my next couple of guests on the show. I'll mention one later, but the first one is, his name is Adam Brandon, and he used to serve as the president of FreedomWorks for more than a decade. He is currently a senior advisor at the Independence Center. Those interview episodes should come out mid-July or even a bit later. They may even come out while I'm out on vacation. I'd also like to remind the audience, hey, please give this episode a thumbs up if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, or give it a review if you're listening to on any audio podcast platform. Please share it with all your family, friends, neighbors, coworkers, and anybody else that's in your contact list that you think would enjoy this. We must wake up every American to the danger that is confronting us. You know, the election of Donald Trump has only slowed the destruction a bit, but it will take each of us participating to turn this ship around. Oh, and before I forget, I want to give a shout out to one of the guys I worked with out here in Wyoming. His name is Dylan, and we had some great discussions along with some Q&A last week. So, Dylan, be sure and smash that like button and share the show with everyone you believe would enjoy it. So with that, let's take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks, as we talk about how our fear, our government-imposed fear, our apathy, and our blind trust in certain institutions and certain politicians has resulted in the loss of liberty for each of us, and how continuing down that path will result in this great experiment in self-governance ending up on the ash heap of history. So let's roll. Welcome to Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines,
exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil.
Okay, folks, as I mentioned in the introduction to this week's episode, and in the light of celebrating 249 years of independence later this week, I'm going to read our Republic's Declaration of Independence and provide some commentary on how our national government, and in some instances our state governments, are behaving in much the same way as King George was, and that caused our founding fathers to make the extremely brave decision to engage in political violence to free our nation from tyranny. So with that, here we go. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Pause right there. Keep in mind that consent of the governed, because it's very, very important. And consent to the government means the people affected by the decisions and actions of government. But back to it, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shewn that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. It's us right now. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, another word to keep in mind, duty, but continuing, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and now it isn't colonies, but the individual states and the individual citizens respectively. And such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So right now we're going to go over the list of things the Founding Fathers listed as the specific reasons for altering and abolishing their form of governments to engage in political violence. First, he has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Now, one of the things that comes to mind with that is the Second Amendment. Does the national government, as well as the individual state governments, do they ignore that constitutionally protected right? Despite Supreme Court decisions recently like Bruin and Heller. Absolutely they do. Most of these government usurpations of that individual right started with the National Firearms Act, which was passed by the Congress and signed into law nearly a century ago, back in 1934. The National Firearms Act is a law that regulates certain types of firearms, specifically machine guns, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, silencers or noise suppressors, and other weapons. It imposes taxes on the manufacture, transfer, and making of these firearms and requires registration with the ATF. You know what that sounds like? That sounds like a bunch of infringements on the people's right to keep and bear arms, doesn't it? And that's just one of many instances of the state and national government refusing assent to the law. So, founding fathers' grievance number one against the King of England is happening right now and has for generations by our current governments, state and federal or national. Let's continue with the grievance number two in the long list our politically violent founding fathers put on the record. It is, he has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. Now, how many times has the national government stepped in and tried to override the governors in the states when they pass laws the people in these states pressed their state legislatures to pass? I mean, I discussed one just last week about the Tennessee law that was passed to ban the quote unquote gender affirming care, which really means chemical castration or physical mutilation of children, or the push to override state laws regarding Title IX manipulations by the national government to override the societal norms of the individual states. They use the federal judiciary to do this. Now, once again, grievance number two that was happening in 1776 is also happening today across the fruited plains. Now, I probably won't have enough time in this week's show to break down each grievance and the similarity between 1776 and today, but I will continue with the reading of the rest of the Declaration of Independence. As I read out the remaining grievances, I can almost guarantee you, dear listener, you could find the same or similar instances happening right now all across the nation. So let's continue. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of the invasions from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their sustenance. Now, I do have to address this grievance. Our national government has 15 cabinet-level executive departments and over 2,000 other agencies and sub-agencies. Altogether, the national government employs more than 2.7 million people, the largest employer in our nation. That sounds like swarms of officers, doesn't it? And that's all paid for by our tax dollars, which is our sustenance. And for the most part, they harass the majority of citizens while supposedly aiding a very small minority of other citizens. The same is true down at the state level. Take my home state of Tennessee. The state of Tennessee has 23 executive branch departments. These departments are part of the state's government, which is divided into three branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial. The state of Tennessee employs over 42,000 people. This makes the state government the largest employer in Tennessee, following Uncle Sucker's example, right? More swarms of people harassing the citizens. Additionally, the Tennessee General Assembly consists of 33 senators and 99 representatives, totaling 132 elected officials there. Now, there are also 3 constitutional officers: the Secretary of State, the Comptroller, and the Treasurer. Of course, we need to add to that list the governor and the judges. Apparently, in 1776, we traded one tyrant thousands of miles away for hundreds of tyrants within our borders. Continuing with the grievances, though, he has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws. Now, right there, think United Nations, World Health Organization, and many others. Now, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. How many January 6ers were arrested and confined without their right to a speedy trial? Also, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. Now, the biggest fundamental altering of our form of government occurred on February 3rd, 1913, when the 16th Amendment was ratified. And that was followed closely by the ratification of the 17th Amendment on April 8th, 1913. That was a quick 1-2 punch that forever altered our nation and destroyed federalism. But continuing on, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. Summer of Love in 2020, anybody? Some state governments, as well as the national government, facilitated that. He is at all times transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioner of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, replace that with illegal aliens now, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. Okay, folks, I'm going to have to pause right there before I go too long in this segment and pick up the remainder and best part of the Declaration of Independence on the other side of the break. So please stick around. I'll be right back. Okay, picking up where I left off. The Declaration concludes with this: a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voices of justice and consanguinity. I guess that's how you say that word. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So, pretty awesome stuff right there, huh, folks? That closing, while being a prayer of the Founding Fathers, also provides a stark contrast to those serving in elected office today at the local, state, and national level. Did you catch those words? Sacred honor. That is definitely a rare attribute for the people that occupy positions of authority and power in our Congress, our state houses, and our local government buildings. Speaking of sacred honor and or a lack of it in local elected officials, I will also have a future guest on this program that can probably demonstrate that fact as it relates to the city of Pigeon Forge and how a high-ranking public official used the power of government, specifically the eminent domain power, for his personal benefit. I'll let you know who and when this person will be on the program next week as we hammer out the schedule. Also, as we consider sacred honor in elected officials, I want to ask you all a question. Would any one of you in the audience spend a significant amount of money to obtain a job that will never pay you back what you spent to obtain that job? For example, would you spend, and let's just for simplicity's sake, keep the number relatable to the average American. So in 2024, the national average salary was $63,795. That is the sum of all incomes divided by the number of workers. Where someone lives, their industry, their education level, their current demand for that job. They also contribute to how much a worker earns per year. But let's go with the round number of $65,000. Would any of you making $65,000 spend $2.5 million to get a job? I think you know the answer to that. Let's say somebody did do that, though. What would be the reason anybody spent that amount of money to get a job that would take more than 40 years to pay back what they spent to get that job? Well, it should be obvious. There is some benefit other than the salary that makes the juice worth the squeeze, if you know what I mean. Well, the salary for a rank and file member of Congress, the House or Senate, is $174,000. We'll talk about that in a bit, or I may share some data on congressional salaries in a blog post on the website. Be sure and check out the website and subscribe to the blog. The address is in the banner below. If you are an audio-only follower of the show, the website is libertyleadershipandlies.com. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies is all together with no dashes or underscores. So that, again, is libertyleadershipandlies.com. So I'll hang that up on the website later today or tomorrow or sometime this week. When you check it out, keep in mind that it is we, the people, that are paying six-figure salaries for what is basically a voluntary position. Let's get back to the very non-altruistic reason for spending millions of dollars to get that low-end six-figure salary. Now, there is a salary range for members of Congress. Congressional leaders receive higher salaries. For example, the Speaker of the House receives a $223,500 annual salary, and the Senate President pro temp and majority leaders and minority leaders, they receive an annual salary of $193,400. So now let's talk about the wealth of some of the members of Congress have accumulated in their positions of power and influence. Nancy Pelosi's campaign spending for the 2024 election cycle, as reported by the FEC and through her principal campaign committee, shows total disbursements of, get this, 7,133 or $130,468 from January 1st, 2023 to November 25th, 2024. It's not even a full 2 years. More than $7 million so she could receive the salary of $174,000. Remember, because she's now a rank and file member, not a majority or minority leader. And that $7 million includes all campaign related expenditures such as advertising, staff salaries, travel, and administrative costs. You know, it's the spending of a small company. But that $7 million, that wasn't the total amount spent to obtain the low end six-figure salary. Oh no. Because additionally, the Nancy Pelosi Victory Fund, which is a joint fundraising committee, they spent significant amounts to support Democrat candidates with expenditures tied to some key House races. But the exact totals for 2024 are less detailed in available data, with earlier cycles showing related PACs like the House Majority PAC raising $134 million. Things that make you go, right? And if you think I'm just going to call out the commies, well, you would be wrong. Just because Nancy Pelosi has used her position to amass a significant amount of wealth during her tenure in Congress for that low-end six-figure job, she isn't the wealthiest person up there using her knowledge of legislation to have her husband pick the best stocks. Do you want to know who the wealthiest member of Congress is? It might surprise some of you. So it's as of 2025, the wealthiest member of Congress is Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, who has an estimated net worth ranging from $300 million to $550 million. It's an interesting point right there that I have to point out before I forget. When getting this data for the wealth of members of Congress, it only provides a range, not a specific amount. And with Senator Scott's net worth reported as ranging between $300 and $550 million, that's a huge gap, right? A gap of $250 million. Because ethics rules only require them to report that range, not an exact amount at the time they were required to submit their reports. Well, guess who wrote those rules? Of course, elected and unelected members of government writes those rules. Never mind the fact that every year you and I, along with every other taxpayer in this country, has to report to the government the exact amount we earn to that very same government so they can squeeze every bit of tax they can out of our wallets. These same members of Congress write the tax laws, and often with an eye towards how it benefits them and their wealth accumulation, never for the benefit of the citizens. Granted, Senator Scott was wealthy before he sought elected office through his work in the private sector, but it doesn't diminish the main point I'm trying to make. One more example, though, and of course it is one of the communists in Congress. Congresswoman Judy Chu, a Democrat out of California, because of course, also saw significant growth in her wealth since she was first elected to Congress. Data shows that her net worth increasing from less than six figures in 2008 to, get this, $7.1 million by 2018, a roughly 7,000% increase, depending on the exact starting figure. Her wealth growth is reported to be linked to investments in possibly spousal assets, just like the godmother of getting rich from her position in Congress, Nancy Pelosi. So after all this, I decided to ask Grok about this behavior. Here's what Grok said, quote, "Spending millions of dollars to secure a congressional seat, a temporary job paying $174,000 annually for House members or senators, with leadership roles getting up to $223,500, is generally not financially wise if viewed purely as a return on investment decision for the salary alone. However, the calculus is more complex due to non-monetary benefits, influence, and long-term financial opportunities." End quote. Yep, the calculus is definitely complex, but the reasoning isn't. These people seek to use their positions exactly for the non-monetary benefits, the influence, and the long-term financial opportunities. Sacred honor is missing from our elected officials. I'm also going to share a blog post about Alexis de Tocqueville and his early writings during the formation of our republic. If you don't know who he is, look him up. And that will wrap up this segment, folks. Stick with me for my closing thoughts and this week's wisdom from God's Word. I'll be right back. All right, folks, our time together this week is coming to an end. It is my prayer that all of you, when celebrating our nation's Independence Day at the end of this week, take that opportunity to instruct or inform your children, your friends, neighbors, and coworkers about the true meaning of this day. Share with them the actual words of our Declaration of Independence and what it meant to every one of those brave men that signed that document. It meant they were signing their own death sentence. It meant that they were participating in political violence. Share with your family and friends and your children the great responsibility we have for citizenship in this republic, because it is our duty. For far too long now, our elected officials at every level of government, the people that lack sacred honor, they have been using government-imposed fear, our own apathy, and often our blind trust in the institutions they have worked from an original intent to rob us of our liberty. So as we celebrate our freedom, our independence this week, keep in mind that it takes effort to maintain it. There has been a demonstrable lack of effort by we the people to maintain this great gift that our founding fathers, that they bestowed upon us. Will it take political violence from a small part of the population to restore the republic? Or can a vast majority of our citizenship shake off that apathy and no longer fear our government, or start exerting a questioning attitude to acts of elected officials instead of blindly trusting them to have our best interests at heart? More importantly, have the concept of liberty and servant leaders at heart for the core of their being. Only time will tell, folks. In closing, this week's wisdom from God's Word comes to us from the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. I know your works, you are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot, so that because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Now, that part of scripture was written about the church in Laodicea and was criticizing it for being lukewarm, neither hot nor cold in their faith. God expressing his disapproval because of their complacency and lack of zeal. He was also urging them to be fervent or cold rather than being indifferent. So what's a synonym for indifference? Well, that would be apathy. Not only has the American church been indifferent towards their role in creating and sustaining this beautiful experiment in self-governance based upon biblical Christian principles, so have the American people of all faiths and beliefs. We, the people, have allowed our government to get to this point. And I don't care if it is Donald Trump or Barack Obama that is the president. Both of them, along with many others going back centuries, have exercised power far beyond what is prescribed in our Constitution. The same is true for the legislative and judicial branches of our national government. Our indifference, our apathy is destroying the republic. It's time to shake it off. Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a stand in the arena together. Reveille, it's time to wake up.